Welcome, and thanks for listening to Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector podcast series. In each episode, we hear from the best in the business on the latest challenges, trends, and opportunities affecting the government and public sector. I'm Christian Fjellgraf, leader of Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector industry team. I hope you enjoy, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today. Today is the third part of our four-part series on GASB 101, Compensated Absences Implementation. Again, I'm your host, Danny Martinez, advisory partner here at Cherry Bekaert, and I lead our National Government and Public Sector Accounting Advisory Team, provides a wide variety of governmental accounting assistance, whether it be Act for Prep, audit preparation, and of course, accounting standards implementation, really helping to allow our constituents to focus more on the important strategic type of needs for their governments and allowing us to help out from the accounting perspective. We have a guest on each part of the series as we walk through the four phases of implementation, and I'm happy to welcome Bailee Steinle, an advisory senior and a GASB 101 implementation team member to the show. Bailee, will you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, thanks, Danny. I'm super excited to be here. So like Danny mentioned, my name is Bailee Steinle, and I'm an advisory senior here at Cherry Bekaert. I joined the firm in September of 2024, so coming up on my 6 months next week. And I have really had the privilege of focusing on the early part of my career on working with state and local governments. Prior to coming to Cherry Bekaert, I spent 1 year in the postgraduate technical assistant program at the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, so the GASB. And what this program allows recent grads to do is become full-time members of the project teams that are taking accounting standards from start to finish. So a really cool and unique opportunity that I think has equipped me to help bridge the theoretical side of accounting with the real world application that our clients are facing. And at Cherry Bekaert, I've got to do a lot of different things so far, Act for Prep, CFA Prep, but I'm really excited to be working on the GASB 101 project and to get involved with GASB standard implementation.
Great, and I can just say that from our initial work on GASB 101, having you on the team, leading some of these engagements, having actually been at GASB for a year has really been beneficial to our clients. So I'm really grateful that you're a part of the team. As a reminder to our audience, this is the third part of our series. So in part one, we had Scott Anderson, also spent time at GASB as a practice fellow. And he and I discussed what GASB 101 is and the first part of implementation, which is understanding the statement. In part two, we had Tatiana Britton, an advisory associate for our team, talk about completeness of your population and how you feel comfortable that you've captured all of your compensated absences. If you missed those, you'll be able to find it on your feed, Cherry Bekaert website. Wherever you found this podcast, you should be able to find those two episodes. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about phase 3, which is evaluation of the current state of your policies and procedures, what might be missing from them, and how to update them. And then finally, we'll talk about the importance of gathering everything that you've done through this comprehensive implementation approach into an implementation memo that you can say, hey, here, auditors, I did everything that I was supposed to do. Please, go through the audit, and it'd be a nice, smooth audit at the end of the day. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned, the first step that we do in this phase 3 of implementation is assessing the current state processes and controls around accounting for compensated absences. Bailee, why do you believe that this is important, and what about doing this during implementation of a new pronouncement, looking at these processes and controls, is particularly impactful?
Right. So the first thing that comes to mind for me when you ask about that is completeness and accuracy, right? Like we want to ensure that all of the data that needs to be accounted for to be in compliance with the standard is being captured. And this is going to be particularly important with implementing GASB 101 because many governments are now going to be including new types of leave or portions of a particular type of leave in their liability that they didn't have to before. So by performing a step-by-step assessment of your processes and controls, we can get a clear picture of how you're currently capturing information, which allows us to identify any gaps or deficiencies and things that might be preventing you from, having true and complete proper data collection. So on the flip side of that, we also want to take a look at it for efficiency purposes. Do we have too many steps? Could we be running 2 reports instead of 4? And a lot of times in cleaning up the efficiency side of things, you're able to improve accuracy as well. So I would say performing this sort of assessment during implementation of a new pronouncement is really impactful because it allows you to ensure that you're successful from the very beginning, right? So say you continue with the processes and controls you have, and you just make it work until the following year when you realize you're missing a really key piece of data that wasn't captured because what you have in place isn't taking that new pronouncement into account. So then you have to go all the way back to the beginning and find that missing piece. So when we take the time to do it at the beginning, we can make sure that you are structured properly and set up for success.
Great. Yeah, that's kind of the fun part because, we're going through, and of course, we're going to get your debits and credits right. We're going to get the entries. We're going to get the disclosures correct. But for a lot of these governments, they have been doing their compensated absences, and we see some of the spreadsheets the same way that they did it in 2005, 2006, 2007. And so being able to look at it from that efficiency lens as well, I think that's really exciting. And it does get the clients excited to be like, oh, wow, I don't need to be doing all of these intermediary steps that we've just been doing, same as last year for the last 20 years. And so I think that's been great. So in addition, Bailee, to processes and controls, and we're also looking at policies and procedures for our clients. So what are we finding whenever we're looking at those policies and procedures?
Right. So when it comes to things like policies and procedures, there's going to be a lot of variation in what we're seeing. And that's because there's going to be a lot of different factors that are impacting policies and procedures. So state or local statutes, government size and structure, all of that plays a role. But I would say a lot of what we're seeing so far is maybe par for the course to what we expected to see. So details about leave accumulation rates, leave accumulation caps, payouts, conversions at separation from employment. Everything that you remember reading in your own employee handbook when you joined your organization. Those are the types of things that we're seeing. And from a procedure standpoint, we're seeing a lot of straightforward calculations, which I think is really helped by GASB 16, the original guidance for compensated absences, being more prescriptive in nature. But I will say that there are some items relating to GASB 101 that will be necessary for governments to have outlined that are missing from what we're seeing so far.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And it might surprise people as you're listening to what do you mean I'm missing things? Within my policy, we've been doing it all along. Our leaves are not changing. So what types of things are you seeing that might be missing from the current policy and procedures from a government?
Right. And I do understand why that would maybe raise some alarm or some concern, but I wouldn't say it's cause for concern quite yet. But I think it's important to understand why we say that there are items, quote unquote, missing. So with GASB 101, we see another shift towards what is referred to as principles-based accounting. And this just means that rather than providing really detailed rules for governments to follow, standard setters are kind of painting with a broad brush, and these more broad concepts can be better adapted to many different circumstances, which is really important when you think about all the different types and sizes of entities that are following GASB standards. But something that you're going to see with a more principles-based approach is that it often requires a lot more subjective determinations, which means that the entity is going to have to be using judgment and their own context of their organization to apply the standards. So circling back to your question of what does this have to do with GASB 101 and the missing policies and procedures, within the standard, we see the need to make a lot of new subjective determinations, such as when leave is more likely than not to be used, or whether the liability is calculated using a LIFO or FIFO flows assumption. And unsurprisingly, because these things are new, the guidelines needed to make these determinations haven't been showing up in the policies and procedures that we've been reviewing so far.
Yeah. And this is the area where, we go through the 4 phases, and some of this stuff is mechanical, right? Like looking for all of your compensated absences. We know where to search for them. Being able to post a journal entry once we know how to record things. We get governmental accounting, we get to do that. But really, in this clarity and absence of policy and procedures, that's when we're going to sit down and talk to the clients and be like, okay, you're missing it. So now what? So can you talk a little bit how the team helps with those policy additions, where something is missing, or maybe even give an example of a recommendation that you've made to add to the policy?
Right. So when it comes to helping fill those gaps or looking at things that are missing, our approach is always going to be to provide a recommendation that's tailored to a client's specific situation, but we also are able to integrate what we have found to be best practice for that type of entity. So one of the great things about our team is that we're able to leverage our knowledge across governments, different sizes, things like that, to provide these recommendations. So for example, if we're providing a recommendation for the addition of a more likely than not policy at a municipality, we're going to consider what this has looked like at other municipalities, not necessarily at a large state agency. So that's just one of the ways that we're able to kind of leverage our team and the different experience that they have. And I think the other thing that's great about our team is that we're able to be completely flexible with our recommendations. So if it's your preference, we can help identify the gaps and areas for improvement and allow you to draft and structure the policy yourself, or we can help provide structured pre-worded policy recommendations that can then be dropped into your existing policies. But you asked for maybe an example, and when I think about an example of a proposed recommendation that we've done, my mind goes to that LIFO and FIFO flows assumption that I was talking about a few minutes ago. And I think this is something that we're going to be seeing a lot of because many governments do not have something outlined in their policies that addresses this. But your policy around this assumption has the ability to really impact your final liability. So just an example of how we've approached this. While we could see that the government didn't have an explicit policy in place, we also took a look at the numbers and reviewed the government's historical data around the leave. And what we were able to see is that there was an implicit policy that existed based on the accumulation of the leave over time and the fact that the use and accrual of time wasn't increasing and decreasing, that sort of thing. So long story short, this indicates to us that the leave is being pulled from the oldest hours earned or a first in, first out policy. So this is just one of the ways that we'll approach it. If it's not explicitly there, we'll look at your numbers. We'll see if it's already being done in your calculations, and then we'll help you draft something that helps explicitly outline that in your policies.
That's probably one of my favorite thought experiments with this one is the whole LIFO and FIFO thing. And it's really like gained like gained a really real groundswell of like the thing that people are talking about, in the governmental accounting circles. And I have like right here to the side of me, GFOA's Government Finance Review, the latest edition, and Michelle Mark Levine in it kind of calls out that FIFO versus LIFO assumption and what that might do to your liability. If you really are doing that last in, first out method, you might not have as big of a liability, right? But she does caution, thankfully, in the article of the level of detail and evaluation that is necessary to land on a determination such as that and put it into policy. So really good discussions continuing to go on with our clients around that. Thank you for sharing that, Bailee. So in your experience, why is it so important to get this stuff, the process, the control, the policy and procedure things nailed down before you work on the journal entries and disclosures? Because when we started this implementation 4-phase thing out, whether it be GASB 87 or GASB 96 or now GASB 101, people are saying, just give me the entry. I need to book an entry because I need to post it, because I need to get my audit out, and that's what I'm worried about. But why specifically in 101 is it important to do these things before you say, let's get to the entry, which is phase 4 that we'll talk about next time?
Right. And honestly, I think this ties in really well to the first question you asked. And to me, it all kind of boils down to that accuracy and efficiency component of it. A government's journal entries and disclosures are their final output. And we all know the saying, your output is only as good as your input. So by taking the time to define your policies and assumptions and build the processes and procedures and controls that are going to help fulfill these, we can save you a lot of time and headache down the road. And it creates a system, in this case for compensated absences, that, directly addresses and accomplishes the appropriate accounting and presentation. And this upfront work is just a much better use of time and resources than trying to pinpoint the cause of an issue way down the road.
Perfect. Great. So one last thing as we wrap up, and it's sort of tangential to policies and procedures, but it's related to implementation memo. So way back in the olden times, in 2022, I was a governmental audit engagement executive. And so even though I don't sit on the audit side of the house anymore, and hopefully never will again, I still hear in my head AUC 230, document. If it's not documented, it's not done. So of course, within this 4 phases, we built in this documentation, and that really is the last part of phase 3. So can you share a little bit to our audience about what this memo is, why is it helpful, and why is it a required component on all of our implementation engagements?
Yeah, absolutely. So when the engagement is all said and done, the implementation memo is going to be your new best friend. This is a memo that we have put together that details all of the need-to-know items about your GASB 101 implementation. And of course, the end product will be tailored to reflect the details of your unique engagement and what the steps that you did. So the memo includes everything from a description of GASB 101 to the subjective determinations required for implementation and the ways that the implementation of the new pronouncement impacted your financial statements. We've even compiled descriptions of the critical procedures that you followed to implement the standard, things like identifying different leave types and measuring your liability. So it's intended to be a one-stop shop for implementation information. And this is an incredibly helpful tool and is required on all of our engagements for various reasons, but I think there are 2 key points that I think are important to highlight. So the first is that it serves as a great reference point for the implementation team and their entity. So whether the implementation team needs to revisit the treatment of post-employment benefits or would like a cohesive document to explain the implementation to an oversight committee within the government, the memo can really provide support beyond initial implementation. And then kind of in that same vein, one of our main goals for the memo is that an entity will be able to hand it over to their auditor to detail and provide documentation of all the steps they have taken and all of the hard work that they have put into implementation.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. Really appreciate your time, Bailee. We're at about time for phase 3, and it looks like we've kind of worked through all of the areas. I really appreciate the insight you provided, on this highly technical and subjective area. Really appreciate the GASB for allowing you to spend that 1 year to soak up all of that knowledge that we are now sharing with us, our team, and our clients. To our listeners, I hope you continue along in this journey with us over the next month as we wrap up the 4 phases of implementation. Hopefully you all, if you've started the implementation, are finding these beneficial and either to let you know, oh, I'm on the right track, or oh, maybe I need to add this thing that Cherry Bekaert mentioned to our implementation. I want to point out that we are signing people up now for our 4-phase GASB implementation solution. If you want to hear about the 4 phases and how we can help, shoot me an email at danny.martinez@cbh.com, or you can message me and find me on LinkedIn as well. One last note, we are doing a webinar. People are signing up. Sign up is available. The 7 things that you must know for a successful GASB 101 implementation. So it's a 1-hour training, free CPE that we are doing in early April. You should be able to find the registration on the Cherry Bekaert website. And again, you can message Bailee or myself if you needed information related to that. Well, thank you so much, and we will see you next time as we wrap up phase 4 of implementation.
This is Christian again. I hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to our next one. Don't forget to subscribe.